In our previous chapter, the world witnessed the impossible, a Primarch standing over the MCU, reshaping the balance of power with nothing but his presence. Nations faltered, agencies panicked, and every sensor across the planet screamed the same warning. This being was far beyond anything humanity had ever faced. Yet that was only the beginning, because now, as the second phase of his arrival unfolds, new anomalies are emerging. Anomalies far more terrifying than the Primarch himself. In this chapter, the true scale of his purpose is finally revealed, and the hidden forces responding to his presence begin to surface. What follows is not just a continuation, but an escalation. Moreover, the Primarch challenges ethical norms, not through overt aggression, but through presence and influence. It does not inflict harm indiscriminately, rather it exposes vulnerabilities in human decision-making and hero-driven morality. Every hesitation, every moment of doubt, and every conflicting instinct among the Avengers becomes a narrative device. Black Widow and Hawkeye, whose expertise relies on precision and ethical judgment in complex missions, find themselves in situations where traditional rules of engagement may fail. Spider-Man, whose sense of responsibility has always defined his heroism, must weigh the limits of his own power against the unrelenting perfection of the Primarch. The resulting tension is as much psychological as it is physical, aligning perfectly with Warhammer theorist-style speculative storytelling. The audience experiences these ethical dilemmas on multiple layers. On one level, there is the immediate suspense of what will the Primarch do? On another level, there is the intellectual engagement of exploring decisions, consequences, and moral frameworks under extreme conditions. Warhammer theorist-style narratives thrive on this dual engagement, combining tactical speculation with philosophical reflection. In this context, the Primarch becomes a mirror, reflecting the limitations, assumptions, and ethical frameworks of the MCU heroes. Finally, the moral complexity extends beyond individual heroes to the alliances and institutions of the MCU. SHIELD, Wakanda, and other global powers must weigh their interventions not only against the Primarch's tactical dominance, but also against ethical considerations. Should they attempt containment, diplomatic engagement, or rely entirely on heroes' judgment? Every scenario carries risk, and every choice becomes a narrative opportunity to explore character, strategy, and consequence. The Primarch, by its mere presence, elevates the narrative stakes from conventional spectacle to a multi-dimensional exploration of power, morality, and the limits of human and superhuman decision-making. The presence of a Primarch in the MCU is not only a challenge, but a catalyst for evolution. Heroes who have long relied on instinct, raw power, or technological advantages are forced into a rapid adaptation process. Captain America, whose leadership is defined by moral clarity and tactical experience, must innovate new strategies that account for predictive intelligence far beyond any human opponent. Iron Man's technology, once capable of countering alien invasions, is tested against an entity whose movements are calculated in real time, forcing him to develop adaptive algorithms and contingency measures on the fly. Spider-Man, whose agility and reflexes often allow him to improvise successfully, finds that improvisation alone is insufficient. Every action must be deliberately calculated, every decision weighed against a being who anticipates multiple steps ahead. This scenario emphasizes the narrative concept of forced hero growth. The Primarch is not just a threat to be neutralized, but a teacher through challenge. By creating situations where failure is theoretically catastrophic, It compels the Avengers and other MCU heroes to evolve beyond their current limitations. Black Widow and Hawkeye, specialists in precision and intelligence operations, find themselves rethinking standard protocols. Hawkeye's tactical positioning, once optimized for conventional threats, must now consider not just physical engagement, but the psychological manipulation exerted by the Primarch's anticipatory tactics. Natasha Romanoff's ability to adapt and improvise is tested to its extreme, highlighting how the Primarch indirectly shapes hero capabilities and decision-making processes. The narrative impact extends to team dynamics as well. The Avengers must synchronize at a level of coordination they have never experienced before. Individual abilities, previously sufficient when deployed independently, are now interconnected within a multi-layered strategy where a single error could lead to cascading consequences. 4. Representing cosmic-level power becomes both an offensive and observational component, analyzing environmental factors and energy flows to identify possible avenues for the team. This creates a narrative tension rooted in both spectacle and intellectual challenge. The audience witnesses action, but is simultaneously engaged in contemplating the strategic depth of every maneuver. Furthermore, the Primarch's influence reshapes the MCU's conceptual understanding of combat, strategy, and tactical foresight. Traditional metrics of power, raw strength, weaponry, or mystical energy, are rendered partially secondary to prediction, positioning, and adaptability. Heroes are compelled to measure success not only by defeating an opponent, but by successfully navigating a constantly evolving battlefield, where every choice carries exponential consequences. From a Warhammer perspective, this provides an ideal framework for speculative analysis. Each encounter, hypothetical or theoretical, demonstrates principles of strategy, foresight, and applied intelligence that engage audiences on multiple levels. The long-term implication of this adaptation process is profound. Heroes grow in capability and perspective not simply by defeating the Primarch, but by existing in a narrative environment defined by anticipation, intellectual challenge, and strategic evolution. This is storytelling at its Warhammer essence, a universe where the introduction of a superlative entity does not just provide spectacle, but provokes philosophical inquiry, tactical innovation, and profound character development. By pushing heroes to their limits, the Primarch becomes a mirror for growth, adaptation, and the intellectual depth of the MCU universe. Ultimately, this paragraph establishes that the Primarch's influence transcends immediate threat. It is a transformative force, reshaping hero capabilities, teamwork, and strategic thinking, all while maintaining narrative tension, suspense, and cinematic engagement. The audience is drawn not only to the spectacle of potential conflict, but to the layered consequences and evolutionary dynamics that define true Warhammer-style storytelling. The arrival of a Primarch in the MCU immediately suggests consequences that extend far beyond Earth. Unlike any previous antagonist, whose influence remained largely planetary or occasionally interstellar, a being designed for perfection in strategy and combat naturally triggers speculation regarding multiversal effects. Every calculated action by the Primarch has the potential to influence not just immediate outcomes, but alternate timelines, dimensional intersections, and probability matrices. The audience is invited to consider a reality in which the presence of a single entity can ripple across multiple universes, forcing adjustments in both cause and effect. This provides a narrative playground that aligns perfectly with Warhammer-style analysis, emphasizing intellectual speculation over mere spectacle. Cosmic observers, including the Celestials, the Watchers, and even latent multiversal entities like the Living Tribunal analogs, would interpret the Primarch's entrance as a critical anomaly. Unlike traditional threats, where intervention could be measured, the Primarch operates with such precision that its presence is almost a natural constant, capable of shifting the probability fields that govern multiversal stability. Every MCU hero action, every tactical adjustment, and even the smallest environmental variable could theoretically influence multiple universes in unforeseen ways. This creates narrative tension that is both cerebral and suspenseful. The audience is constantly reminded that the consequences of interaction are immense, and the Primarch's influence cannot be confined to one dimension or one conflict. The theoretical crossover scenarios are particularly fascinating. Imagine the Primarch encountering variants of the MCU heroes in alternate timelines, or interacting indirectly with cosmic entities whose goals transcend earthly concerns. Each potential interaction generates complex narrative possibilities. Could a Primarch destabilize interdimensional power balances? Would it force alliances between previously opposed factions? Could the presence of such a being accelerate technological, mystical, or tactical evolution across multiple realities simultaneously? These questions are at the heart of Warhammer-style speculative storytelling, where the audience is engaged in continuous mental simulation of possible outcomes. For the heroes themselves, the multiversal implications introduce both strategic opportunity and philosophical quandary. Should they attempt to contain the Primarch in one timeline, knowing that its predictive intelligence could allow subtle, indirect influence in parallel realities? Could misjudged actions create cascading failures across timelines? Every choice is magnified, and every theoretical misstep is consequential. This tension elevates the narrative stakes beyond physical confrontation into a realm of intellectual and moral complexity. The audience is encouraged to think critically, hypothesize, and speculate, engaging with the story on multiple levels of cognition and imagination. From a cinematic perspective, visual storytelling could emphasize these multiversal effects subtly through environmental shifts, energy fluctuations, and glimpses of alternate realities reacting in response to the Primarch. These are not direct explosions or battles, but nuanced signals that communicate the vast scale of influence, creating engagement that is both visually and conceptually stimulating. By combining theoretical speculation with cinematic cues, the narrative maintains the tension necessary for a 35 to 40-minute video, while ensuring that intellectual engagement remains constant. Ultimately, the multiversal implications of a Primarch in the MCU illustrate a core principle. The introduction of a superlative, perfectly engineered entity reshapes not only tactical and moral dimensions, but the very fabric of probability and consequence across realities. This aligns with Warhammer theory storytelling, emphasizing theoretical exploration, narrative depth, and audience engagement through intellectual curiosity, speculation, and the continuous reassessment of possibilities. The hypothetical confrontation between a Primarch and MCU's mystical or cosmic powerhouses introduces a fascinating layer of narrative complexity. Unlike standard physical threats, entities like Doctor Strange, Scarlet Witch, and Loki operate on principles of reality manipulation, dimensional travel, and energy manipulation. The Primarch, while primarily engineered for unmatched strategy, combat, and predictive cognition, interacts with these powers in ways that test both its adaptability and the limits of magical logic. Doctor Strange, relying on the Time Stone and mastery of the mystic arts, would immediately recognize a pattern in the Primarch's movements that mirrors temporal foresight, anticipating actions before they occur. Scarlet Witch's chaos magic introduces stochastic variables, unpredictable energy fluctuations, and reality warping effects. Yet the Primarch's probabilistic mastery allows it to respond with anticipatory positioning, mitigating potential threats without direct. The tension here is theoretical but intellectually engaging. The Primarch does not require offensive magic to neutralize mystical threats. Instead, it operates by exploiting predictive advantage and environmental control. Loki's illusions and misdirection, historically effective against heroes and cosmic entities alike, are systematically deconstructed by the Primarch's calculated responses. Every spell, hex, or time loop is met with micro-adjustments, subtle counters, and preemptive positioning. The audience is invited to consider how a being engineered for ultimate strategy could interact with forces that defy conventional physics, emphasizing speculative narrative and cerebral engagement rather than immediate spectacle. From a strategic perspective, magic and cosmic entities introduce non-linear variables that challenge traditional prediction algorithms. Doctor Strange's manipulation of time introduces paradox potential, while Scarlet Witch's chaos-based alterations create unpredictable environmental shifts. Even so, the Primarch's analytical mind identifies probable patterns within chaos, leveraging small environmental and temporal anomalies to maintain superiority. Thor and other cosmic heroes, observing these interactions, begin to recognize that traditional power hierarchies are disrupted. Intelligence, foresight, and environmental control now dominate raw mystical or cosmic power. This emphasizes a Warhammer theorist-style theme. True supremacy is not determined by strength alone, but by comprehension, adaptability, and predictive mastery. Narratively, this segment establishes the Primarch as a universal-level challenge. The tension emerges not from immediate confrontation or visual spectacle, but from intellectual anticipation. How would heroes who wield magic, reality-altering abilities, or cosmic-level energy respond to a being capable of preemptive mastery? The answer is inherently theoretical, creating narrative suspense that is cerebral and long-lasting. The audience is encouraged to speculate. What sequences would succeed? Which heroes could influence outcomes? How might multiple magical or cosmic entities coordinate against a being whose cognition exceeds their combined capacity? Finally, the hypothetical interaction with magic and cosmic forces highlights the Primarch's broader narrative function. It serves as a benchmark against which all MCU entities are measured. Strength, magical ability, or cosmic influence becomes relative when contrasted with absolute strategic intelligence. This allows for layered speculation, continuous audience engagement, and theoretical exploration that extends beyond immediate conflict. In the Warhammer tradition, such scenarios are not just hypothetical exercises. They are a narrative tool to explore principles of power, prediction, and adaptation across multiple planes of reality. The introduction of a Primarch into the MCU does not simply translate into a series of destructive battles. Unlike conventional adversaries, whose conflicts often result in overt urban devastation, the Primarch demonstrates a level of tactical restraint that underscores its mastery. Every move is calculated not merely to dominate, but to optimize outcomes, preserve resources, and manipulate the battlefield without unnecessary collateral damage. Skyscrapers, transportation systems, and critical infrastructure are treated as variables to influence opponent behavior rather than objects to destroy. This introduces a critical narrative tension. While the potential for catastrophic destruction exists, the Primarch's control ensures that the suspense arises from strategy and anticipation rather than indiscriminate chaos. Heroes attempting direct confrontation, Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, and Captain America, are challenged to navigate an urban environment that is simultaneously familiar and subtly hostile. The Primarch uses micro-adjustments in terrain and positioning to influence engagement, creating choke points, redirecting energy flows, and channeling attacks into controlled outcomes. This demonstrates a level of environmental mastery rarely seen in the MCU, emphasizing intellect over raw strength. Black Widow and Hawkeye attempt to exploit gaps in strategy, only to discover that even seemingly minor environmental features are calculated within the Primarch's predictive algorithms. The audience perceives a scenario where every footstep, every maneuver, and every decision carries weight. Tactical restraint extends to the Primarch's engagement with civilians. By deliberately avoiding unnecessary destruction, it imposes a moral and strategic challenge on the heroes. They are forced to act in ways that balance offense with protection, creating situations where traditional combat advantage must be weighed against ethical responsibility. Spider-Man, whose personal code prioritizes civilian safety, becomes a critical lens through which the audience perceives the tension between instinct and calculation. The Primarch's indirect influence over urban infrastructure elevates the scenario from a simple battle into a multidimensional tactical puzzle, creating engagement and sustained curiosity for viewers. Furthermore, the Primarch's manipulation of the environment demonstrates its ability to convert static settings into dynamic tactical instruments. Roadways, buildings, and energy networks are subtly adjusted to create advantageous scenarios, forcing heroes to continually adapt. Every attack is anticipated, every escape route considered, and every environmental variable used to control outcome probability. This transforms conventional urban conflict into a cerebral engagement, where victory is measured not by destruction inflicted, but by adaptive superiority and decision-making efficiency. From a narrative perspective, this scenario reinforces the Warhammer theorist-style approach. Suspense and engagement derive from anticipation, intellect, and the layered consequences of action rather than sheer spectacle. The Primarch's restraint and control elevate the story beyond visual impact, creating a framework in which strategy, morality, and predictive mastery define supremacy. By the end of this stage, the audience is drawn into a narrative that merges environmental dynamics, ethical considerations, and theoretical combat analysis, reinforcing the Primarch's role as a transformative entity within the MCU. As the hypothetical scenario reaches its climax, the narrative focus shifts from immediate combat to theoretical victory conditions. A Primarch in the MCU is not merely an opponent to be defeated. It is a benchmark of strategic, tactical, and intellectual supremacy. Every hero must navigate a landscape where conventional victory is redefined. Brute force, advanced technology, and mystical power alone are insufficient. Instead, triumph requires adaptation, coordination, and foresight that matches or exceeds the Primarch's predictive capacity. From a Warhammer perspective, this creates an ideal framework for speculation. Viewers are invited to consider not just who could win in battle, but under what conditions any outcome is even theoretically possible. Potential strategies for achieving theoretical victory are diverse and complex. Heroes might attempt coordinated, multi-pronged attacks, exploiting environmental variables, and combining their powers in novel ways. Alternatively, alliances with cosmic entities or interdimensional observers could provide critical intervention. Yet each action carries exponential consequences. A miscalculation could destabilize entire cities, compromise moral integrity, or even trigger multiversal disturbances. The Primarch's presence transforms the MCU into a multidimensional chessboard, where every move must consider cascading effects across multiple planes of reality. The audience is drawn into this speculative exercise, analyzing the probability, morality, and tactical feasibility of each hypothetical scenario. A narrative emphasizes that the Primarch's influence extends beyond immediate conflict. Even without engaging in direct destruction, its presence forces heroes, institutions, and cosmic observers to reevaluate their strategies, alliances, and understanding of power. This creates a sustained narrative tension that maintains engagement throughout the hypothetical timeline. From Captain America's moral reasoning to Iron Man's technological improvisation, every character is challenged to evolve, illustrating the transformative effect of a superlative entity on familiar protagonists. It is a scenario where the measure of success is not simply victory, but growth, adaptation, and the capacity to respond intelligently under extreme conditions. From a theoretical standpoint, ultimate consequences could reshape the MCU in multiple dimensions. Earthly institutions would be forever altered by the experience. Global heroes would evolve their strategic and collaborative capacities, and cosmic entities would update their observational models to account for an unprecedented intelligence and tactical foresight. Even the potential for multiversal implications adds layers of intrigue and long-term speculation, allowing the audience to contemplate what-if scenarios that extend far beyond immediate story arcs. This aligns perfectly with Warhammer theorist-style storytelling, where narrative power derives from intellectual engagement, speculative analysis, and the continuous exploration of consequences across multiple levels of reality. Finally, the Primarch serves as both a narrative disruptor and a narrative mirror. By challenging the MCU heroes at every level, physical, tactical, psychological, ethical, and cosmic, it creates opportunities for layered storytelling. Theoretical victory conditions, environmental manipulation, ethical dilemmas, and multiversal ripple effects converge to form a cohesive, speculative scenario that sustains curiosity, encourages intellectual engagement, and maintains cinematic tension. The audience is left not with a conventional resolution, but with an expansive contemplation of possibility, strategy, and the ultimate nature of power within the MCU. In conclusion, the hypothetical arrival of a Primarch in the MCU is a masterclass in Warhammer-style narrative. It challenges heroes, redefines victory, reshapes environments, and engages audiences through theoretical exploration rather than spectacle alone. By the end of this scenario, the MCU is irrevocably transformed in concept, strategy, and philosophical depth, leaving viewers to ponder the implications long after the story concludes.